All right. Okay. Let's just wait for them to join in and then we'll kick off just now. Okay. Good evening, comrades, and welcome. As most of you know, this is the 47th anniversary of the commemoration of the assassination of Comrade Onkgopotse Tiro. On Monday, the president of Azapo and Azapo members, Comrade Strike Tukwane, led us by paying tribute on the 1st of February, which was the day on which Tiro was assassinated. And some of our comrades in the Northwest from Potchefstroom, Rustenburg, and other areas also gathered in the Nokana to pay homage to Tiro. They did a wreath laying there. It's important that we observe these significant milestones and episodes in our struggle to remind ourselves of what the struggle was all about, what the ideals were, and the sacrifices that men like Mthulika Shezi, Bantu Biko, Onkgopotse Tiro, Muntu Mieza, and other comrades, Bome Mashalaba, Bome Mtalipule Khware, a whole host of those who died, those who went to prison, those who went to exile, those who were persecuted, banished. What was it that they were fighting for? And we hold these memorials, these commemorations to remind ourselves, but more importantly, to rededicate ourselves as well to those ideals that they fought for. This year, as Azapo, we have resolved to to commemorate also Black History Month. As we know, Black History Month is a Black American invention, an African American invention. It goes back to 1926 when Carter G. Woodson and many others resolved that it's important to teach African Americans about their own history because they were living under slavery and Jim Crow. And in much the same way as we are experiencing here in Azania, their history, their struggles, their heroes, their heroines were not captured in history books and they in history books, whether at school or at university. And they resolved that, look, let's have, firstly it started as a week and then it went on to a month. Then they will dedicate to collect information, to collect books, to share information with their children about who they truly are. So I think it is fitting that we should also continue to do that in Azania. Black History Month has now also been adopted by countries like Canada, the UK, and many other countries around the world. And it's a tragedy that our South African government hasn't really come on board to also make it an official month of commemoration to celebrate Black history and to celebrate our heroes, our heroines, inventors, scientists, educators. But I'm not billed here to speak this evening. I'm just here to facilitate. We have a young historian, somebody who has dedicated his life to researching our own history as Black people, but as well a teacher of history in his own right, Comrade Mojuta Motlamme. I'll just do a short bio of his so that we have a grasp of who is really going to be addressing us this evening. Comrade Mojuta Motlamme. Motlamme is a Black intellectual who works as a teacher in the Department of Education, teaching history. He is currently studying for a master's degree in historical studies, focusing on the history and performance of the Trooper in Makapanstad, an important cultural we call it practice, particularly in areas around Northwest, but a culture that exists in many other areas also in Botswana and so forth. So he's actually trying to develop a proper history of that. He has written an honors mini dissertation on Onkgopotse Tiro called A Social Biography of Onkgopotse Tiro, with an emphasis on Dinokana. He has published a book chapter in a forthcoming book on Marxism and decolonization that looks at a comparative biography of Onkgopotse Tiro and Stokely Carmichael. So we can sense and read from this that he is really a committed academic and a scholar on Tiro, and now he has expanded his focus also into somebody that must have influenced Bontate Welile Nhlapo, who I see here, Nosipho, Bontate Mangena, at a time when they were active in the Black Consciousness movement. That is Stokely Carmichael, or also known as Kwame Ture. I'll just leave it there, and then he will expand on other aspects of his work. I can see that he's particularly interested in historiography of the Tswana people, or the Sotho-Tswana communities, and African spirituality. So his work is quite expanded. So let me take this opportunity to actually express gratitude and appreciation for him agreeing to do this memorial lecture this evening. And I don't want to waste any further time, because I think we have enough guests here. And then I will just hand over to him to commence with his memorial lecture. Marapukiao re Mojuta Motlamme.
Kepadisa. Dumelang bagolo. Leina la me ke Mojuta Motlamme, and today I'll be doing a memorial service on Tiro. The title of the memorial lecture is To Breathe the Air of Freedom That Is Ours to Breathe. A memorial lecture on the life and times of Onkgopotse Abram Tiro of Dinokana. So a brief outline here will follow, but before I go into the brief outline, I just want to acknowledge the African gods. I just want to acknowledge the African ancestors, Badimo. I want to acknowledge my family. I want to acknowledge the leadership of Azapo that is present with us here. I want to also acknowledge Black Consciousness movement in Tanzania activists such as Nosipho Matshoba. Thank you, comrades, for gracing us in this occasion, friends, colleagues, and everyone else. The brief outline states that we're going to talk about, first, we're going to talk about Black History Month and why we should respect and revere our history. We're also going to talk about Onkgopotse Tiro and its relevance into our history and the present realities that we face as a country. Then also engage on how we can breathe the air of freedom, because in a sense, Onkgopotse Tiro and his generation, and I think Matshoba can concur with me, that they breathe the air of freedom, even in an oppressed society at that time. They allowed themselves to be free when it was not fashionable to be free. I just want to quote two quotes from Onkgopotse Tiro just to set us off. The first quote says, these quotes are quite long, please bear with me. The first quote says, "To those who wholeheartedly support the policy of apartheid, I say, do you think that the white minority can willingly commit political suicide by creating numerous states which might turn out to be hostile in the future? We Black graduates, by virtue of our age and academic standing, are being called upon to bear greater responsibilities in the liberation of our people. The magic story of human achievement gives irrefutable proof that as soon as nationalism is awakened among the intelligentsia, it becomes the vanguard in the struggle against alien rule. of what use will your education be if it is not linked with the entire continent of Africa? It is meaningless. The second quote, Comrade, says, the day shall come when all shall be free to breathe the air of freedom, which is theirs to breathe. And when the day shall have come, no man, no matter how many tanks he has, will reverse the course of events. So these two poignant statements, quotations, are from Onkgopotse Tiro as he was making his speech, gallantly so, in 1972 at the University of the North. So we can already sense a sense of urgency in him and his comrades, because through this speech, Onkgopotse Tiro and his generation launched a direct confrontation against the apartheid movement. Many in the Marxist community speak about the Durban moment. Those in the Black consciousness movement speak about the Tiro speech and how the Tiro speech galvanized the generation to actually stand up and fight for freedom in a confrontational manner. Let me start with Black History Month. Black History Month was founded in the United States in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson and his associates. But before he founded the Black History Month, which was a program, it started as Negro History Week, because he chose February because February was when the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass occurred. So he chose these two men who played a big part in African American history. Remember, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and Frederick Douglass was one of the abolitionists and pioneers of Black literature in the African American community. So before 1926, there was the American Historical Association, and Carter G. Woodson felt that they misrepresented Black history, and he felt that African American history was marginalized. So he decided to form an organization called the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Carter G. Woodson is also known for writing books such as The Miseducation of the Negro. And also he was a contemporary of scholars such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Arturo Schomburg, Alain Locke of the New Negro, Zora Neale Hurston, the writer, and other African-American intellectual giants. So what can we learn from Black History Month? We can learn that as Black people, we do have a history. Our history does not start with contact with white people. And it is often that in all colonial societies, we find ourselves in the Black diaspora always having to reference when we have contact with white people. For example, African Americans will always start with 1619 as a reference point, whereas in South Africa, we start with 1652. But we have a much deeper history. And this history is present in our folklore, it's present in our praise poetry, it's present in our daily life and interactions. Yes, our ancestors did not record the history like our European counterparts, but they recorded it in a different manner. And we need to appreciate that through music, through unconventional means, our history is recorded. It's just that we need to have a deeper lens for us to see that. Black History Month is important for South Africa because we can't know where we are going if we don't know where we come from. It's a shame that in South Africa we do not have a dedicated program for Black History Month to actually celebrate our heroes in different fields and facets of life. I mean, we have Black people striving in all aspects of society, not just in politics. We need to move away from thinking that Black people only participated in politics. Black people were everywhere. And it's important for us to understand the relevance of history, because if we know where we come from, we know where we are going. And history teaches us that societies change over time. Black societies are not static. When we study the past, we do not mean that we must go back into the past. When we study the past, we use the solutions of the past to inform our present. If now we are having a scourge of rape, gender-based violence, what can 1800s Black South Africa teach us about how men and women related to one another? History informs all the other subjects. So it's pointless for us to talk about science when we do not have a historical base and understanding of ourselves as a society. And where do we get this base? We get this base from indigenous knowledge systems. And these indigenous knowledge systems can help us to actually understand our scientific ways of life. And there are many scholars who have written about African science. And we need to embrace that before we venture into a global discourse about science. Because if we leave our own history behind, our own cultural knowledge behind, then we become poor on the global stage. So if we don't study our own history, we run the risk, to paraphrase Steve Biko, of becoming spectators in a game we should be playing. Most of our history in South Africa, and this is something that many of us in history departments in our country we are frustrated with, we find that white people from South Africa, America, and Europe are the ones who are writing and documenting our history. You find a PhD student from the United States coming here, doing research for 3 months, and that person is an expert on the subject. But when we read the books, when we review the literature, we find that there are extensive gaps. And now, what is more disheartening is that as a society, we've turned our backs on subjects like history. We've actually said that no, our children must not go into history. And this is a worrying trend because we need more historians. And this is why I'm always encouraging those in the public service, those who work in the private sector, to say, if there's a story, as Toni Morrison has said, write it. Don't wait for us. As historians, we also have our own interests. If I'm going to write about Onkgopotse Tiro and someone wants to write about Mapeka Mohapi, they can write, they must write, because the more the merrier, but we need all of us to be involved. It can't be the work of a few people. If you are interested in something, write about it, because we need to preserve and document our history. I want to move on to Onkgopotse Tiro and talk about him, because this lecture is mainly about him and how I come into the work about him. I was inspired to write about Onkgopotse Tiro because I read an article by Kwanele Sosibo that spoke about the fact that, you know, Onkgopotse Tiro's legacy and history has not been documented. So it was quite problematic for me. And I felt that, look, let me contribute. Let me do my best to also be part of writing about Onkgopotse Tiro. As we know, Onkgopotse Tiro was born in 1945 on the 9th of November in Dinokana in a section called Hononyani at the Ratiro homestead. Onkgopotse Tiro comes from a lineage of people who fought against colonialism. He's also related to the Dinokana Muilwa ruling family. Onkgopotse Tiro was raised in a matriarchal family. His father abandoned the family when he was a young man. So he was raised by his grandmother and his mother and family relatives. So this was a time where in the black family, it took a village to raise a child. So Onkgopotse Tiro was not necessarily just raised by his mother, he was raised by the whole community. And it's something that is concerning today, that is not happening with our young children. Our young children are being raised by only their parents. And it's something that we need to introspect and go back into the past and interrogate how we used to do things. So Onkgopotse Tiro was a child of the opulent and turbulent 1950s. Mind you, the 1950s was a time where South Africa was at its zenith economically. So in a sense, there was a bit of a trickle-down effect on black communities. As little as it was, there was a trickle-down. That's why you get your Miriam Makebas, your Jonas Gwangwas in the 1950s who came to prominence because there was a trickle-down economically. But as well, politically, it was a turbulent time because black people were starting to rise against colonial oppression in the form of apartheid. These were the early years of apartheid, but Black people were still using non-violent means. So Onkgopotse Tiro's childhood is very relevant because it is here where we learn about the revolts of 1958. So often in South African history, we talk about 1956, the Women's March in 1956, as if it happened in a vacuum. There were other sites of resistance, such as the Nokana in Ziras in the Northwest Province, where women raised their fists and said, we will not take passes. The chief at the time, Ramothibe, supported their decision. And this was met with hostility by the apartheid government because they wanted to impose what we call Bantu Authorities Act. These Bantu Authorities Act were the forerunner of the Bantustan states. Another important thing about Lihuruti, where Onkgopotse Tiro comes from, is the fact that this was a pipeline into exile. Otileng Tshwane and Tshepiso Ndlovu have written a book about the contribution of Botswana to the liberation of South Africa, and they actually identify Lihuruti as a pipeline to exile. So it's very important for us when we think about heritage sites and politics in South Africa. We know that rural areas have played a big role. As humble as they are, we need to upraise them and we need to go there. We can't always hold events in the city in glitz and glamour. We need to go into our people, conscientize and remember where we come from. So Onkgopotse Tiro in 1968 goes to the University of the North and joins the Black Consciousness Movement. So the Black Consciousness Movement is his home organization. So organizations today like Azapo are the forerunners, are the ones that come after the Black Consciousness Movement, but knowing that it's a continuation. So Black Consciousness was a philosophy that sought to inculcate mental liberation in Black people and self-love in a basic nutshell. So in a sense, for me, it's when I define Black Consciousness, it's basically saying to Black people, love yourself, know your value, know your worth. And remember, at that time, apartheid was entrenched, was deeply entrenched in our societies, where everyone was comfortable with living in the system. So Tiro was part of a generation of radicals who said, we want Black power and we want it now. So his speech at the University of the North in 1972 was a continuation of the Black oratory tradition, where Black people have used oration or making a speech as a site of bearing witness and actually speaking back to power and oppression. So Tiro called on Black students to rise against injustice and fight for freedom. I mean, for the first time in the country since Sharpeville, here was someone saying that, you know what, the apartheid system is unworkable. We need to change it. And the speech was an intellectual speech, but at the same time, it was a heavily politicized speech. And after the speech, the fight against apartheid was never the same, because Tiro was expelled from Nosipho or the University of the North, and now students galvanized. And when he was expelled, he went to Soweto to teach at Morris Isaacson. And when he got to Morris Isaacson, he conscientized the likes of Tsietsi Mashinini and other June 16 revolutionaries such as Khotso. So what we learn about people like Tiro is that their philosophy, their politics did not stay in one place. You know, in Black consciousness, they had something they called a formation. So when a leader was doing something, there was someone shadowing that person, so that when that leader gets arrested or gets killed by the authorities, the work continues. And that's something that, as young people today, we need to learn. I mean, when I look at my age today, I'm 28, I'm 29, I'm 28. And Onkgopotse Tiro was killed in 1974 at the tender age of 29. And we need to ask ourselves as young people today to say, what are we doing for our country? How are we contributing to our country? Because we can never be young enough, because people like Hector Peterson rose up at a young age to actually fight against injustice. So I want to touch on the legacy of Abram Tiro and say that Onkgopotse Tiro has left us a rich legacy. And this rich legacy is something that we need to tap into and actually be inspired so that we can work on our own realities of the present. I mean, when I look at Black consciousness activism, you find that the likes of Azapo are carrying the banner, the torch of Black consciousness activism to say that, you know what, we're not only interested in electoral politics, we're also interested as a party in the grassroots. We're actually interested as a party in the well-being and the plight of Black people. And we'll actually go into the people and be activists, be conscious activists on the ground. Another legacy is the legacy of Pan-Africanism. You know, when Onkgopotse Tiro and his contemporaries left the country in 1973, they went into exile into countries such as Botswana, Lesotho, and other countries. And they carried the work. They formed movements such as the Southern African Students Movement. And this shows that when they got to these other countries, they were aware of a Pan-Africanist spirit. So when people speak about colonialism in the 1900s, are they aware of the fact that people like W.E.B. Du Bois were actually holding Pan-Africanist congresses in 1919? So in a sense, as Black people, we need to also see ourselves in the history and not only look at history as a site of victimhood, as a site of oppression. You know, we need to look beyond what the settlers did to us. We need to also look at how we rose up despite the system. Then we also find his legacy in education activism, because remember, Onkgopotse Tiro was a teacher, and he calls upon us as teachers like myself and Patrick Nyati to say, you know what are you guys doing in the education system? Are you actually just teachers and earning a salary, or are you conscientizing the youth of today to actually make a difference in our society? You know, because none of us could have predicted that Onkgopotse Tiro and his cohort would have conscientized the students who would have risen up against the system in 1976. So education is a site of struggle. Education is a site of conscientization. And also political activism. You know, you are never too young to be a politician. Politics started at a young age, and it's about community work, not only about naked careerism, which is something that we must guard against, to say we walk left, but we talk right. Another legacy of Onkgopotse Tiro is that he was a public servant. When he was working at Maurice Isaacson, he was a public servant, and his ethos as a teacher and the way he carried himself is something that we must reflect upon and actually ask ourselves, are we actually using the principles of Ubuntu and Batupeli as we serve the country? When we stand in front of learners, what are we teaching? Are we prepared for our learners? Do we go to class with a wholeheartedness? And also leadership. Onkgopotse Tiro was a leader in the Black consciousness movement, and we need to acknowledge that he used his leadership gift to serve his community. You know, by the time he went into exile, he had his teacher's diploma. And someone like that could have been co-opted into the system. He could have actually worked in the system, because at that time, that's when B.J. Foster was the Prime Minister of South Africa, and he wanted to incorporate the Black intelligentsia into the apartheid system so that they could be the bulwark against the Black mass, so that they could justify apartheid and say that apartheid is actually working. So Onkgopotse Tiro, another thing about him is that he teaches us about reconciliation, because in his speech, he actually rebukes leaders like Lucas Manyani Mangope and Mangosuthu Buthelezi. But at the same time, he says we must go back to these leaders who are crushing us, but we must go back and actually educate them. And it's something that is very important to say, how do our politics look when it comes to Black reconciliation? Because it's easy to reconcile with other races, but as Black people, how do we reconcile amongst ourselves? How do we make people see their errors of their ways but also bringing them into the conversation to say, look, we don't wholeheartedly reject you outright. You are still our people. You erred, you made mistakes, but how can we bring you back into the conversation? Because it's easy to say someone is a collaborator, but it's difficult to do the work of actually bringing them in to the space of Black liberation. So another thing is that when we think about the legacy of Onkgopotse Tiro, we must think about how we marginalize the rural areas. You know, for me, going into spaces like the Nukana and doing interviews, I learned a lot about how our rural areas are not utopias. Our rural areas are spaces of suffering. Our rural areas are spaces where there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And you know, the thing that really hurts me the most, Ntate Kepadisa, is that you find that actually our rural areas is where the concept of Black self-reliance started. You know, you found that Black people were able to actually come together and buy farms. Black people were able to come together and build schools. You know, there's numerous stories dotted across the rural landscape where Black people started their own churches, all these activities through their own agency, through their own hard work. So for me, it's sad when I see the rural space today depending on people working in urban areas. And it's a conversation that we need to have as Black people to say, how do we bring back that consciousness? Because for me, Black consciousness in South Africa originates in our rural areas where people actually stood up to oppression. Yes, they were defeated, but at the same time, they said, you know what, we will go and work at the mines so that we can bring the money back, so that we can buy back our land. But today, to see the rural space as a space of defeat, it's really something that is a sad sight to behold. And it calls upon us to really use our gifts to actually go into the rural areas to say, how can we capacitate the chiefs? How can we capacitate the makotlas? How can we capacitate the headmen to say, how do we help them to actually serve the people better? Because it's really not nice seeing rural areas having minerals, having arable farmland, but our people are suffering. Our people are not getting access to that. It's only a few capitalists who are gaining from that. Another legacy of Abram Tiro is in the Fees Must Fall movement. And these movements, for me, when we historicize these movements, when we actually look at the historiography of these movements, we must never ever see these movements as only emerging out of 2015 when students called for roads to fall. And for these movements to learn from the generation of Tiro, the generation of Sobukwe, Biko, and other Black luminaries who came before and actually fought against the system and paid a heavy price, that today we are breathing this air of freedom, but we know that people died for us to be here. And we must never ever compromise and actually forge ahead in building this country and making sure that our people get a better deal at the table. So in breathing this air of freedom, I'm inviting us into Black consciousness. I'm inviting us to read into Black consciousness. I'm inviting us to live into Black consciousness, to actually say to us that Black consciousness is not difficult. It's not difficult to comprehend. That's why Biko and Tiro and all these other comrades' philosophy was able to spread like wildfire, because Black consciousness begins with us. Whether you're in a township, you're in a village, you're in the inner city, Black consciousness is about saying, how can I be of service to Black lives? How can I be of service to Black humanity? Black consciousness is about saying Black lives matter, and what can I do to improve the condition of Black people? You know, scholars like John Henry Clark teach us to say that as Africans, we have no friends. We must always look upon ourselves to improve our situation. So breathing the air of freedom is also about accountability as leaders. As we can see what's happening in the Zondo Commission, what's happening in the country with regards to PPEs, COVID-19, and how our leaders are misappropriating funds It's about being accountable to say, how do we go from being struggle icons? How do we go from liberation people to going into looters? And we need to question ourselves. And as parties like Azapo, we're also part of the Malays, because this is our country. It's not just the country of the ANC because they're in power or they're in office. This also falls upon us to say, what are we doing in our little corners? What are we doing in our communities to educate the young people about corruption and how not working in the public service is derailing the Black community? Because when you drive that Mercedes Benz, when you are part of the Wabenzi, you are not only doing it for your friends, but you are hurting the Black community. So how do we hold our leaders accountable? How do we become accountable to each other when we have a Black radical tradition of Lekgotla in Bizo, a space where chiefs were held accountable? How do we hold our leaders accountable so that we do not reproduce personality cults across the continent where it's about leaders and what they want instead of the people? Breathing the air of freedom is about learning and learning from different traditions, not only being comfortable to say, I am Black consciousness, so I will not read the literature of Pan-Africanism, I will not read the literature of Afrocentricity, I will not read the literature of Afro-pessimism, I will not read the literature of other radical Black traditions. We must understand that learning is not only education, it's not only in the classroom, it's in the streets, it's in the shebeen, it's everywhere for Black people. We learn from our grandmothers, we learn from our mothers, and we must also understand that the textbook is not the only way to learn. Through talking to people, through engaging with each other, through making sure that we go to our communities. Let's launch books in Black communities. Let's do memorial lectures in our Black communities. Let's stop with the glitz and glamour and go into the countryside and the townships. Breathing the air of freedom is about activism. We as scholars, as teachers, we must become scholar activists. We must start our own Black historical organizations. I mean, I'm looking at the historical profession right now and saying to myself, I can't. I have to organize with other Black scholars so that we can find our own historical society. Because at the moment we have the Southern African Historical Society, and it's a white society, even though it's changing. But for me, I want an apologetically Black society of historians and scholars coming together and being free, because Steve Biko and his generation taught us that sometimes you have to close ranks and be amongst yourselves so that you can hear yourselves and you can be free to speak without being policed. Because when we see white people in our midst, sometimes we perform for them, we perform for whiteness, and we forget ourselves as black people. Breathing the air of freedom is about healing, comrades. It's about healing. It's about making sure that we reconcile. You know, Azapo itself had problems with the UDF and other ANC movements in the 1990s when it was a time of black on black violence. And it really calls upon us to actually come together as organizations and reflect upon what happened. Because I think too often when we talk about Reconciliation Day, it's a black and white thing, but it's not really a black on black conversation where we actually come together and actually speak about the 80s and what comrades did to one another, how movements sabotaged each other, how movements destabilized each other, and you know how the Black consciousness movement was also destabilized in the 1980s. And it's a very important conversation that needs to be had. And for us to heal, to say, you know, for us to heal, we need to find closure. So another thing is that we need to build our nation as we breathe this air of freedom. This air of freedom came at a heavy cost, comrades. And for us, it's very important that we understand that we need to build our country. Whether as historians, we must use our gifts to actually go into our communities and capacitate. Because my job is not simply to write history textbooks. My job is to conscientize and actually say to my fellow historians to say, let's go into our communities and do workshops so that next time someone else will write, even if he doesn't have a university degree, because we cannot wait for certification. You know, people like John Henry Clark taught us that you don't need a PhD to write Black history, you know, and they've done a lot for Black history without getting the PhD. They got the PhD at a later age. You know, the scholars like Sheikh Anta Diop, Molefi Asante, you know, the list is endless, but we need to learn from these scholars who are not popular. You know, you don't find them as rockstar academics, but they actually chose the path of Black liberation, and they decided that we're going to write in spite of the prevailing dominant trends. So it's important for us to build this democracy in our rooftops, in our corners, in our spaces, you know, and we must also remember that as a country, we've always leaned towards elitism, you know, from our first movement to say it was always a case of educated people. And for me, I also want to challenge organizations like Azapo to say, please, when you invite people to come and speak at your event, also look at inviting people who don't have a matric, who don't have a grade 10, so that we get a balanced perspective and nuance from community members as well, so that people know that our history is not only the preserve of the elite. People like myself are privileged. We come from universities, we are university trained, so we are palatable. But we don't also want that. We want people who are unpalatable, so that we learn that history is not made by the elites. It's also made by the masses. If it wasn't for the masses, I wouldn't be able to stand in front of you here and speak like this, because we would still be fighting for our freedom. And this freedom did not come easy. So as I close, I just want to say, as I close, I just want to thank other scholars who have written about Onkgopotse Tiro. I'm not alone in the space of writing about Onkgopotse Tiro. People like Khangalelu Tiro, a nephew of Abram Tiro, has written a book called Parcel of Death. It's available at bookstores across the country. Anne Heffernan has written an article about Onkgopotse Tiro. It's available online. She has also written a book called Limpopo's Legacy. Otsilen Tswane and Polisin Ndlovu have written a book and have included Onkgopotse Tiro in it about Botswana and the liberation struggle. Another person who's really pushing the legacy of Onkgopotse Tiro is Lucky Boy Shameja Simeja. He's a scholar of Onkgopotse Tiro, and he's actually doing research. I look forward to the day where he actually writes his work. He has developed a play about Onkgopotse Tiro, and there are numerous scholars, such as Steve Mukwena, who's done a documentary where he features people like Nosipho, Matshoba. So in a sense, I'm glad that the legacy of Onkgopotse Tiro is alive, but more still needs to be done. There are lectures that are being done. The family as well is keeping the legacy alive with a memorial lecture, but more still needs to be done. We can never say we are done. We need to theorize, we need to write, we need to debate. You know, for me, it's important that we humanize Onkgopotse Tiro. In my own social biography, one of the questions I was asking people was, what other things did Onkgopotse Tiro do? And I was told that Onkgopotse Tiro was a normal human being. He was also mischievous as well. He would take a car and drive without a license because he's human. And we must also understand that our leaders are human beings, first and foremost, because sometimes we put so much on them, we forget that sometimes leadership is not easy. And we must also understand and bear with them and say, you know, if it was you, how would you have done things better? But also understanding that it was the circumstances of the time they were living in. So I really invite us to really read further and understand our Black history, because it's very important in this Black History Month to understand about the global Black diaspora, the Caribbean, other sites as well, you know, South America, North America, there's so much that we can learn from Black History Month, but also saying to us as Black South Africans to say, we also have September. It's something where we can also celebrate Black History Month as it's celebrated as Black Consciousness Month as well. But Black History Month is not only subjected to 1 month. It's alive every day. We carry it in our veins, and it's a point of reference for us. You know, when we talk about an African-centered perspective of history, we need to be aware that we are also there. We need to look for our scholars. One of the things I always do when I write, when I quote in my references, in my studies, I always look for Black people's contributions. I'm always told that Black people didn't write about this, but I always find them. I search, I look for their contributions, because we are there in the archives, we are there, and our voices matter as well. You know, I was reading about the SS Mendi, and one of the projects I want to do is actually take the SS Mendi and go into the families of the victims of the SS Mendi, where Black men drowned during the First World War, and actually tell these family stories, because we cannot simply abdicate our responsibilities. You know, as a generation, we must find our mission and fulfill it, because unfortunately, the struggle was not only done on the picket lines, it was also done in the lecture halls, in the classrooms. You know, for that to be June 16, there had to be Onkgopotse Tiro teaching in Soweto. There had to be Comrades teaching in places like Kronstadt. So it's very important for us as Black intellectuals to serve our communities, to realize that you don't need to wait for funding to go into the Black community, to set up a projector, to actually go and lecture about Black history. You don't need to wait for invitation. Go into your communities and actually speak and engage with the people. And we must also bear in mind that our people have so much to teach us. You know, for some of us, we are doing what we call social history, because we believe that the history is not only about elites. The history is about the ordinary people and how they have made the history. So as we think about apartheid, as we think about oppression, we must also think about Black people and their value as well. You know, we must say to ourselves to say, yes, there were some people who were living against the odds of apartheid. So in closing, I just want to say to us this Black History Month, to say, let us rededicate our efforts to understanding where we come from as a society, to also appreciating the efforts of our gallant heroes, such as Onkgopotse Tiro, Steve Biko, Nosipho Matshoba, and all these other comrades who played their part in the struggle against apartheid, and to call upon the young people to actually write the history. You could be doing engineering, you could be doing mathematics, but if you're passionate about the story, write about it. We are here to assist. We are here to say, we are offering our services to the Black community to say, if you've got a story, talk to us, approach us. We are very approachable. We are not elitist. We want to work with our people so that their stories can be published, so that their stories can be heard and told. And we want to decolonize and actually say to publishers to say, look, leave the grammar alone. These are Black people and their stories deserve to be told. We're not here for the English. We're here for the knowledge, so that our people, our grandchildren have a story to be told. Comrades, I thank you.
Very much, Comrade Mojuta Motlamme. I think that was quite a very passionate, but at the same time, elucidating talk you gave. Not only did you focus on the life of Tiro and the history that is generally written about, but you also gave us pointers about our current reality and how Tiro's ideas, how he speaks, how his speech still speaks to our present conditions. That air of freedom, we have to ask ourselves the question, are our people breathing that air of freedom that Onkgopotse Tiro had envisaged? And I think we will all agree here that we are not any close to breathing that air of freedom. The squalor is increasing, the poverty is increasing, lack of housing is increasing, our education system seems to be in shambles. And lectures like this remind us of the ideals that all our martyrs gave their life for. And we use them as aid memoirs to say, well, you know, maybe I might be comfortable today, but when I leave my home just 200 meters from here, I see people living in shacks. The roads are impassable when it is raining like this. People are drowning and all of that. Yet this is 26 years later. We are in charge of government. We make the fiscal decisions. We make the policy decisions. And South Africa is not a poor country. We are a middle income country, and other middle income countries ensure that some of those basic facilities they give to their people. But let me thank you for laying the, I don't know if carpet is the right word, so that the other speakers who are lined up can also come in. At this moment, let me also acknowledge the presence of Welile and Nhlapo. I did speak to Comrade Kadiete yesterday, and he suggested that because he has got some constraints about traveling, if he is not available to join us during this time in Mafikeng, he will ask Welile and Nhlapo to share a bit with us about Tiro, because he worked very closely with him. He knew him personally. And as a former national organizer of SASO, he's got some deep insights about the life of Onkgopotse Tiro. But let me get to the next speaker, Nosipho Matshoba. As we know, she was very close to Tiro. Give her an opportunity to also paint us a picture of who Tiro was and the kind of work they did together as a collective of students fighting for liberation. Sis Nosi, this is your time, this is your platform. Please share your insights and ideas with us about our hero and our martyr and your own friend, and probably, I mean, your friend and your contemporary. Thank you very much.
Dumelang kaofela. A ke re la nkutlwa, even though ke kentse mask la nkutlwa.
Rahudla.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Ke gore go na le batho mo ntlong, so ka molao tshwanetse go kenywa di-mask.
No, thank you very much, and we commend you for observing the regulations.
Ntate Motlamme, you laid down a nice background, not only Katiro, but about us Black people, you know, starting with the American situation, where did Black Man starts from. And we see that as Black people globally, we still have problems, you know, asserting ourselves. You know, BCM is basically to say that as a Black person, who you are, your own identity. When people change their identity, you lose yourself. You lose your identity. Your identity, you should say, this is what BCM was saying, define yourself. Take care, I mean, you have to define yourself and say that, as Nosipho Matshoba, who am I? And this thing, even we lost next to Gozet. I have now to go back and find out and we know we need to do that research as ourselves, as our families, just to know and have your feet on the ground. And that's very important when you have your feet on the ground. And all of that. And one of the things that BCM was very good at was the literacy training, which Welile were involved in. Maybe he might talk about the literacy training. And I think that one of the things that we should do is to go back to that and teach our people. As we are teaching Black consciousness, we also should teach our people how to read and write appropriately, not to write for the cat sits on the mat or the cat set up the mat, but to teach them who they are and know themselves. So I think when we were growing up, there was a fashion of skin lightening, gore ke tswa di-cream tsene di senya batho difatlhego di retsa gore re tshwane le makgowa. And not only skin lightening, re stretcha di meriri, re itšha ditlhogo tse re stretcha meriri because you wanted to look different. You know, this inferiority complex by instilling in our heads, it's so strong that we need to get rid of that. We need to come back to that and make sure you don't lighten your skin, you how stretchy muriri, you are beautiful as you are. When we were growing up, you know, I'm black and I'm proud. You know, I'm black and I'm proud. In a how you chaba mo spilling. Kanko ya how eo sai shapang. A kere batho ba bang banka dinko tse tsa bone ba di reshape gore di tshwana le tsa mago. And yet you are changing yourself, you are changing who you are. When you do things like that and you look at your grandfather, you look at your mother, you know, what do you say? And then I'm improved. You know, I'm self-improved or you know, let me go back to Ndate Oribuanka Nega Tiro. You know, Tiro was a very soft-spoken person, very humble and committed, and a Christian. You know, I don't know if some people know Hore, ko kerekeng ba ile ba mo suspenda le ko kerekeng e Sabata because on a politics and all of that. So some of those things are very important that people should know. Hore kereke le yone go suspendile monna. How not only ko sekolong ba go suspendile le ko kerekeng ba go suspendile. He was a very powerful and committed person. I think even today, Sabata, they say that they are still, you know, divided. They could never, you know, when you talk about Christianity and you talk about politics, they don't match. All you want to go to is to get money from people, and but anyway, Tiro. Like I say, he was a very committed person and very humble and a very good speaker. He knew how to capture people. He knew how to make people listen. He knew how to make people understand, not only listen, but understand what he was saying and internalize what he was saying. And that was him, the way he used to talk. He was not on screaming at people. I said the dramatics. He talked to people. He was one of the people, you know, and people did understand what he was saying. He did not become the president, SASM, overnight. He did not become in the SASO, le Rangwezi. Rangwezi Nangwekulu. And Rangwezi Nangwekulu is another person who is very committed. And when he talks the language that you would understand. I remember when he was banned, and Bamo Benetsi ko Sibasa. Sibasa at that time was a very rural place and not very good. I remember when I went to visit him, Adula, in that forum, and you could see that people were watching him and doing all sorts of things. Sistemi, of course, but not Maburu. Sistemi, but Varona. But anyway, even under those circumstances, Abenilu, we managed to smuggle, I would say, smuggle him out of Sibasa into Botswana and Raymond Seko Sibasa. And I don't think Maburu will ever forgive us for that. How did we do that? How did we smuggle somebody who was banned from Kosibasa, rural area, remotely say, go Botswana, aba across the border go Botswana, and you know, it was nice. It was nice to see when we left the country. I know I'm jumping from place to place. When we left the country, Bokwe Mafuna, Teokwe Mafule, Ramwesi Nengwekulu, and myself in 1973, we were supposed to go to Kokhale, where Tiro. That was the agreement. And then at that time, I think Tiro, Jeff Patko, were still in Botswana, working on the SASM project. And we were hoping that we will meet them Kodinogana. When we left, we went to Kodinogana, and we were hoping we will meet Kodinogana, and you know, we proceed to Botswana. But unfortunately, we couldn't meet Kahore. They were delayed to Botswana. But at that time, we knew Hore Tiro is going to be banned. And we left the message with the family that Tiro is, there's a banning order coming, because one of the people who worked for the office in Zahamangope came across a letter from Maburu, Bablela Mangope Hore, Reto Romela banning order, Ejo Benang Tiro, and just so you are aware, Bamu inform Hore Tiro should be banished to Zirast, go at So when we left, we knew Hore, we left the message, Hore Tiro is going to be banned, and that he should turn around and go back to Botswana, you know. But Tiro, instead of going back to Botswana at that time, he now had to, but again, he had to go legation to make sure that, you know, the Osadisapila, in a way, Osadisapila, and then our Kopala Welile already had a copy of the banning order, but hey, you are going to be banned when and then you can't go back to Sirast, and you cannot be rounding up your business. And then after middle, you have to go to Botswana. But you know, on a Sansa Samaya anyway, because you can't wait for a banning order. Banning order is going to confine you for 5 years, and you can't even move. So he was planning to go to Botswana. And he was already working go Botswana. But before then, Akereneli national organizer, after Ranwe Sinengwe Kulu was banned, so he became the national organizer, SASO. But when he was banned, we knew that he was going to be confined. There's nothing he can do. And then, of course, he was also working as a organizer for SASM. He had already established relationships with Botswana, Lesotho students. And when, you know, we also have to understand something. This is one of the things that you, Azapo, have to inform the youth. You need to explain to them what is SASM, because SASM, you know, when we tell people what is SASM, they get blown away because they think that they are the only ones who started SADC. SASM was SADC, you know,
Okay.
in a way.
Long before SADC was formed.
Long before SADC was formed, you know, the Southern African Student Movement. And basically, it was just to make sure that we understand what other students were facing. Education. And we didn't get information from outside unless if that investigation, which Tiro and Jeff mainly was doing, because Jeff and I drive. So what happened was that we wanted to also compare and liaise with students from outside South Africa. University, because university. How do they start chemistry? How do they start biology? How do they do these things? And we also had to learn from them and compare with them. And it was an interesting journey that he was undertaking. He was learning a lot. And Southern African Student Movement was just that. It was launched Botswana, and I remember, if I'm not mistaken, the first president, SASM, Nelly, some Motswana woman, Joy Monatuk or something. And then after Joy, Tiro became the president, SASM, Southern African Student Movement. And then from there on, it was, coming from South Africa. Not that we had influencing the region, let me call it the region, the Southern African State. Yeah. It was the region, yeah. Not that we were trying to influence, but we were also trying to inform them what is going on in South Africa, and learning and taking information from these other countries back to South Africa that these students are doing. And it was going to be a powerful endeavor and a project. So when people talk about Tiro because of speech, it was not just the speech. I don't even want to talk about the speech because people talk a lot about the speech. It was not because of the speech. The speech was the catalyst of a whole lot of things. It was a catalyst like June 76, you know. It did not start in 1976. It started in 1972. Students doing what students do and talking politics and informing people, Black consciousness, entrenching itself into the community through SASO, through BCP, through NAYO, you know. But the thing is that when we moved out of South Africa now, bringing in that region, the SADC region, that became very dangerous. And of course, our counterparts, our revolutionary counterparts also did not want that. They did not want that because then it will cut off the funding for other, for our counterparts. Counterparts, I don't know what you call them. But yeah, you know what I mean. So yeah, it would cut down. Now the world and the funders were beginning to ask, what is this Black consciousness movement? You know, Black consciousness, and they had to hide us. And you know, one of the things that we believe, or one of the issues, one of the reasons that he was killed was because of his role in the SASM, Southern African Student Movement. I always have to say Southern African Student Movement so that people don't confuse it with South African Student Movement, Yagudi High School. Okay. So I always have to say it in full like that so that people, and unfortunately, when Moemedi, is that most people don't get the difference. Yeah, right. And it is up to us to make sure that we continue with the teachings that was Steve Biko, Tiro, we have to continue teaching. And I'm happy that I see young people now. I cannot be going around and talking to these students. But I can tell you that I remember one time Kilogo Vets, about 2 years ago, Kilogo Vets, looking for some Professor Govets. ali ko building Robert Sobukwe building ko Wits. And I was, you know how Wits is when you don't know, especially when you are my age, somewhere around and around Parliament steps away. So I asked these two ladies, Kiri, where is Robert Sobukwe building? And I Bashaba and Abatula. Fortunately, and I didn't even know it was the building. And they were oh, key, Robert Sobukwe. And I turned around and said, you know, let me just continue with my Black consciousness thing. Kerry, do you know who Robert Sobukwe is? I'm asking these two ladies, students, COVID. By me Robert Sobukwe. Kerry, do you know who Robert Sobukwe is? Barry, I see that blank face, and
The
they
blank
have,
stare, yeah.
they have the cell phone, and I know they have Google on the cell phone. They can Google who Robert Sobukwe is. Couldn't you? I don't know, but they did not know who Robert Sobukwe is, and I told them that, you know, you should Google. Yeah, we will carry Robert Sobukwe, just so you know. Robert Sobukwe, Onaliko Robben Island. Do you know what Robben Island? Of course, by it's Robben Island. There, I guess. So, Kiri, yeah, Onaliko Robben Island, and I explained the circumstances, how he got the throat cancer. And now they were beginning to say how, you know, they were beginning to, but I was saying to myself, Kiri, it's my fault that these kids don't know anything about Robert Sobukwe.
Okay.
What is it that I'm doing to teach them how Robert Sobukwe in a man? After that, what's a CSC machine? I can't kill students. What about CSC machine? No. No, Kari, Nosipho Matshoba. You must do something.
Yes.
You must make sure that these children, well, not children, these students know about these important people in their lives. And Moemedi, it's your turn. It's you who is supposed to do these things. It's you who is supposed to tell the students. I mean, we lost our momentum, the students. Okay. I see the other guys, you know, they are targeting students and by recruiter the students. Students are our students. Well, I'm not claiming them or anything like that, but that's where we started, you know, that's how we started. And people at universities, young people like yourself, you need to get out of your soft cushiony and go there and just talk to them. How can the strike or anything? Let Azapo be visible because we are not visible. How can the strike? I try to look for a yellow shirt or I don't see any, you know. And I'm not saying that we should try and do our thing. Maybe we don't have funding to do those things. But when other people are organizing, and even students when they're organizing their strikes and all of that, we need to support them. We need to be there so that they can learn and know about Tiro. People don't know about, well, Steve Biko ya no ba itika Steve Biko ka orahonali special assessment Steve Biko ya no, which is nice, and at least by itika Steve Biko. But people don't know about Tiro. People don't know about Tesi Machine, people don't know about Onkgopotse Tiro. They don't, you know, and we also have to try and celebrate June 16. Hey, people have taken it away from us, and we have to recapture. We have to recapture it and let it be ours.
Thanks.
Okay, Memo.
All right. No. Thank you very much, Osnosi. I think we appreciate your injunction that the work must continue. We'll certainly do our part as Azapo and the office that I'm involved with. We will certainly share your wishes and your whatever, your guidance there about what work needs to be done. You've shared quite a lot with us, comrades, who are also fading out of memory, but who also did tremendous work in the struggle. Comrade Jeff Dumobakwa. We shouldn't forget those comrades because they remain consistent up to the end. And when we do these memorial lectures, Comrade Tiro is just a symbolism of this narrative, this struggle. So we also need to bring them in, and would like to thank you very much that you reminded us of Bona, Lebo Comrade Lebo Mafule, who have passed on. Let me bring in Ndade Welile Nhlapo, who also has a very rich history and memory of that period because he was actively involved in it, to share with us about what he remembers about Tiro, and maybe share with us about why it is important that we should commemorate Tiro and have occasions like this in order to inform ourselves. And Ndade Welile Nhlapo, where is he? Let me unmute him. Is he unmuted?
Okay.
No, Uting, re ke mo unmute.
No. Thank you very much. I'm
Sawubona
unmuted
baba.
now.
Sikhona njani?
I know.
Yeah, Comrade Khadiete spoke very glowingly about your relationship with Tiro and the work that you did together. So we are quite appreciative of you having set aside time to spend this evening with us and share your knowledge of Tiro and the work you did together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First, I must thank Nosipho for nudging me to and sending me the details to connect.
Okay.
We're just chatting about something else yesterday, and she told me about this commemoration, which I'd also heard from Professor Sipho Mantula.
All right. Okay.
We're talking about different issues, and he also mentioned this.
All right. Okay.
And said maybe you might want to be part of that process. I said, fine, that's okay.
Yeah, I see he's also present here, Professor Mantula. Yeah. Welcome, we acknowledge you, sir.
Well, let me start by saying that the first time I met Tiro was in 1972, May 1972 in Alice.
Okay.
When we met all the universities to discuss the strike at Teflop. Because by that time it was quite clear that reinstatement of Tiro was a no-no for the regime. For those who were in charge of the campus at the time. And of course, we were having the same challenges ourselves in these bush colleges in which we were pushed into.
Yes.
Having declared solidarity with the students in Teflop, taking a position that we won't go back to class until Tiro is reinstated. That was the rallying call. But then we had to meet and then be able to agree on how to coordinate this. So we went to Alice with the view of meeting at Forte. They refused to give us a space to meet there. And then we went to the Federal Seminary, just across. Dr. Stanley Mojuta and Vumen Dandala are the people who really hosted us. And Reverend Kubule, who was the head of the seminary. So at least we're able to gather there and in the 2 days discuss what to do. it became clear that the only thing that we needed to do was to take a position that says that all of us, on going back to our campuses, to mobilize our campuses, target the specific date that we'd agreed upon, and on that day have a national student boycott.
Okay.
Demanding, I think that's the time when the student at Teflo would be going back under the conditions that were given to them, expected to sign certain letters of apology so that they can be reinstated. So to rally around that, and then we decided on that day we are going to have this national boycott. That was the earliest declaration. I'm sure those who might want to look into how that declaration was worded will get a sense of the mood that was prevailing and the determination to do exactly what we had planned. Of course, we all went back to our campuses, those who were delegates, and of course the rest is history. Those strikes took place. Even some of the white universities joined in, particularly University of Cape Town, where NUSA still had a bit of a stronghold. They joined in the strike in solidarity.
Okay.
Of course, we acknowledge. But let me go to Tiro. That's the first time that I met him. And then after that, we had to go back to our universities. And then, of course, different processes took place in different universities. In the end, we all had to take decisions at one point or another as to what do we do, because it was quite clear that the strikes were not going on the way in which we were determined, and some people were falling on the wayside, pressure from families, harassment from the system, and therefore they had to conform to the conditions. Some of us decided to panula. And if this is the case, better leave university and just go on and see what we can do. But then with a smart way of doing things, we said, no, let's establish branches in our communities where we are, in our regions. We had the RIF student organization, which we established in the RIF, organizing around that all the students who came from Teflo, from Goye, from Forte, who were in the townships, Mamelodi, Alexandra, Soweto, just mobilizing from there and continuing with the conscientization process, because we had long made a determination that we are blacks first before our students. And that what we're experiencing in the university was a continuation of the oppression that was meted to us as black people, as part of the black community, and hence the mobilization of students. But at the same time, there was a trend that started. Some of the people who were doing education, some not necessarily, found space in the schools that they were for teaching. And they continued to teach. That's how Tiro ended up in Morris Isaacson, JT went to Orlando West. Nhlapo Mloto went somewhere. So there was a spread of them into this high school. And then, of course, the clear understanding was that they are going to organize the students at that high school level. Because quite clearly there were a number of challenges that students needed to be organized. Tiro then participated in that. Morris Isaacson was there with George Nene and others. And they did a sterling job. Just like others, JT and them did a very good job where they are. And the trend spread. But when the banning came in 1972 of the SASO 8, there was a challenge. How do we then begin to replace the leadership that was banned? There was a first wave of replacement. Henry Isaacs came in. No, it was first Bishop Philip as the president of SASO. Then the next wave of banning orders came, and then they were removed. And then the term of Tiro and them came with Henry Isaacs in as president and Tiro as national organizer. That's when he started really continuing with the active work that Rangwezi Ndungekulu and Steve Biko were doing in organizing youth formations in the different provinces at the time, culminating in the launch of the National Youth Organization in Mankok and the Eastern Cape, which Tiro presided upon, supported by Kumloane, Mapeta Mohapi, Tebogo Mafule, and myself, who became part of that process. And we went on organizing in whatever way, wherever we could, including student nurses at Baragwanath Hospital. People thought we had other interests, Gumba material, no. That was also an issue. I mean, we had to get some people to accompany us. But to organize it was a tertiary university. And we understood that. So I moved around with him to most of the universities where he was introducing himself. Ngoye, and we went to UNB, and then we went to Teflop. That's where I met Cyril for the first time, and Frank Chikan. They were part of the audience of Tiro, by the way. At the time, they organized the church as leaders of the SCM, because SASO was not allowed to operate on campus. So they organized a church where they all used to have their activities. I hope they remember today that they were part of that audience, having contributed. And Tiro was able to get the message through to them and the rest of the students that were there to begin to understand where are we going. But with time going on, Nosipho left, as she was explaining, and then we started having a challenge. Tiro had been elected as the president of SASM, which we call the big SASM, because we're the small one, the high school student one. So always had to make the distinction that we So the small SASM continued with this work, but we focus on the big SASM now. So Tiro left, as Nosi was saying. It's a pity that Khadieta has not been able to join, because Nosi, that is the person who brought the letter to us.
Yeah.
The actual letter that was intercepted in Mafikeng in the office of Mango.
Yeah.
It was Khadieta.
Kingdom, yeah.
Yes, yeah, he's the one who brought the letter. And we sat down and discussed. We said, there's no two ways. You've just come back, you might better go back. And that's how we got back and then met his fate in the manner in which we did. But when some of us left subsequently after the preliminary uprisings, ending up in Botswana, we continued to assist Jeff Pakwa, who still continued to try and establish the headquarters of SASO. You see, the other day I heard Sipho Mabuse in the memorial of Jonas Kwanga saying that first met Jonas Kwanga in Botswana in 1974. It was a concert that was organized by ourselves. And Jeff Porter was in the center of that. Brought in Bokefas, Jonas, Dudu Pukwan, and all that group. For the first time, they came to perform in our region. That's when Jonas even took a decision to stay in Botswana. Many people don't know that. They had come to there because we were raising funds for the establishment of the headquarters of SASM in Botswana, which Jeff Parker was trying to continue to contribute towards ensuring that that movement lives on, with the hope that there will be some reorganization and somebody will be elected, but the secretariat will be established and functioning. So I think Nosi is correct. You know, for the students in South Africa and in this region to get themselves organized around SASM, and what became another center of that organization were the support for the struggle in South Africa, mobilizing of the student youth. SASM was also affiliated to the All Africa Student Union, which was established in Ghana, Kumasi, around the same period. So SASM became part of the All Africa Student Union, part of the continental movement, because at the time of the Cold War, those dictatorships, students were finding it very difficult. These dictators were really kicking students around. So it was organizing in the continent also against those dictatorships and being contact with the students and mobilizing them in support of our own struggle. So I think it is in that context that Tiro should be understood, and that he could have gone very far and his life was cut short. My own humble opinion, and others, old as you might think we are, we must organize, mobilize, and teach the students about this system. There's a program that I'm involved in every year with teaching of SRC leaders in conflict resolution since the Black Must Fall movement, so that they can understand how to engage in negotiations and to resolve the conflicts that they have on campus, but also to begin to function as student representative bodies rather than party political functionaries and representatives on campus, because that becomes their major weakness. Their representative capacity, their unity becomes weakened. It's been quite successful up to now because you get to understand what their thinking is, what their challenges is, how they see things. Last week, we finished another one with just youth. Again, in a way to try and get them to this kind of activity. I'm linked up with a movement that I'm working with, a think tank. We are in touch with the All Africa Student Union. We worked partly with them, those who initiated the reformation. So the All Africa Student Union is back, functioning. It has been re-established last year.
Okay.
And I believe that what we need to do is to work towards the re-establishment of SASM, to make those links, to re-affiliate once again to this All Africa Students Union, because that's the only way we can link our students with the processes and movements that are taking place on the continent. And of course, to be able to encourage our students here at home to organize themselves in a manner in which their strategies and tactics will be fit for purpose, operating in a very different atmosphere and arena. Our struggle is being stolen. But the very people that were raising fists high at some point, shouting slogans, they still continue to do so. But it's our duty to make sure that Tiro's name continues. And I believe let's work on that project. And once SASM is re-established, posthumously, we can fight and nominate Tiro as a patron of the student movement. That is how we can keep his name alive, his legacy alive, student struggles alive. Thank you. I'm sorry I took a bit of time, but I was just being thrown into the deep end. And I said, for Tiro's sake, I will respond in the manner in which I'm doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You actually responded comprehensively, as if you weren't just nashed today to come and speak, but we expected that from you, because from what Comrade Nosi had told me as we were preparing for this discussion, and what Comrade Khadiete had also told me when he apologized that he can't be with us, he said, no, you are more than a capable replacement, because you're a former organizer as well with, I think, I don't know, at SASO. I don't know if you took after Tiro or what had happened, but he said that no, you are quite a capable replacement. And thanks for sharing with us that very rich history. I think it's the first time that I hear about the Alice Declaration. So, Mojuta, there's something for you guys to pursue there as historians. Maybe link up with Nhlapo to see if we can get hold of a copy of that document and share it with our young people. And also that NAIO was launched at Mount Cope. It's one of the BCM structures that has been written very little about. But we know that it produced some very iconic leaders like Comrades Kap Motsau, and I think the current speaker of the national, what do they call, National Council of Provinces, Comrade Masondo, also comes from NAIO. So we hope that we will produce more historians who will say, well, maybe a little bit more has been written about SASO and maybe BPC and others. Let's try and focus on NAIO and see who led it, how they did it, and what its contributions in our liberation history is.
Moemedi, can I just say something quick, just a sentence?
Yes, ma'am.
That history is history, and we cannot change history. What happened in history happened, and what we need to do also is to write the correct stories. History our background here, BCM, has to be written properly. People cut and paste themselves where they were not. And that person was nowhere to be found. Maybe you nearly part your system. But anyway, history is history, and you cannot change history.
No, thank you very much, Osnosi. Let me at this point also bring in, I see we've got about 23, we were at some point at 29 people participating here, so we've got quite a representative audience, both young and old, comrades who also spend time with Tiro and yourselves, mobilizing, organizing. I see the former president of Azapo, Kim Melani, if I'm not mistaken. She's also here. She was probably at that Alice meeting that Comrade Vuisa Kunta used to tell us so much about how inspirational Tiro was in his address at that meeting. And he said to us one of the quotes that is often attributed to Steve: it is better to live for to die for an idea that will live than to live for an idea that will die. He said he had he had Comrade Onkgopotse Tiro actually use it for the first time at that Alice meeting where he was in attendance. And I think that Nhlapo has just expanded on where it was held, how it happened, and all of that. So that's something worth writing about in history, because that sounded like quite an important meeting that produced that Alice Declaration. During the Fees Must Fall, some of us who often write short narratives on the student movement, which is where we come from, also reminded the Fees Must Fall movement that the first national shutdown of universities in South Africa happened actually around 1972, 1973, when students at the universities boycotted classes and shut down universities in solidarity with Tiro. But let me give an opportunity to our participants here. Anyone who would like to perhaps make a contribution, ask a question, expand on what has been said, what they may know about Tiro. This is your opportunity to interact with our presenters and to also make your comments. If you can, please raise your hand, but if you can't raise your hand, let's just try and be orderly, and we will attend to those questions and comments. So this is your opportunity, dear friends and comrades. Anyone who would like to bail the cat, just unmute yourself and make a comment or ask a question. I'm trying to check if I have anyone. All right. Is there someone? Okay, Ndade Nyati, you can go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity for being part of this wonderful presentation. As a young person determined to grow in the field of academia, I've learned one or two things. Honestly, I didn't know much about Tiro until I met Mojuta, who was so keen in investigating the life and times of this revolutionary who fought against a very oppressive and cruel regime.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I've learned is that the information maybe does not reach the desired audience, which appears that we were so keen to write as young academics, the academics who have been in the field for some time, they write. But the question we might ask ourselves is, do we get the audience that we desire? Now, I will make a submission that Mojuta touched on this a little, to say we need to go to this audience. It is not enough to write, because we often use this big English that the desired audience sometimes do not understand.
Yeah.
Now, how do we then reach them? The submission I would like to make is workshops, in particular in townships and in rural areas, are necessary so that we can reach as large audience as possible to ensure that we revive the Black consciousness. It is true that many of our people do not understand Black consciousness. Yes, they have heard about Steve Biko, they have heard the concept Black consciousness, but do they understand it? What does it mean? Do Africans accept themselves? Do they love themselves to an extent that they reject cultures that seek to compromise the African identity? That is my submission, Comrade, and thank you very much.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Yeah, I think, and I hope that that's a challenge we will embrace. It's actually quite an important submission you are making, that we've got to go outside of what Comrade Moemedi has called the rarefied offices and atmospheres from which we work, and go into the rural areas, much like SASO did. I mean, it is a credit to what Comrade Mangena, Comrade Mpotseng, who are also here, did, because they built that clinic in a very rural area in next to Ginsberg. And they also built schools in Hammanskraal, they built schools in Zanin, you know, places that are not normally served by established authority. And Comrade Mojuta in his presentation did say that, in fact, it is in the rural areas where you see the spirit of Black consciousness of self-reliance being exemplified. The many schools today which are now regarded as public schools, I think if communities were to rise up, will end up as private schools, because those are schools that were built by communities through contribution. One donating a cow there, another one a goat there, another one a chicken there, and schools were built. You know, we speak to schools such as probably Hebron. I know I went to a school in Lumanyaneng where in the 80s there was still a building fund that we had to contribute to if you wanted to be admitted to that school, even though it was built in the 70s. But subsequently, most of those schools were taken over by government. The same goes for public hospitals. Most of these public hospitals that you see in the rural areas could qualify to be private hospitals, but they are communal, they are public. So what we are trying to say is, today when we speak about private schools such as Institutions, you know, your top private schools, we often forget that, no, it's Black people that actually led the way by building their own institutions in Alice, in Hilltown, and Adams College in KZN. So it's important that we have this kind of history to teach and remind one another about our own contributions to the history of education and such that. But I don't know if any of the panelists want to respond to this input by Patrick Nyati. If any one of you is available, please come in. But Comrade Kamohelo, I see your hand is up. Please come in. Maybe we should take 2 or 3 questions at a go.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Moemedi, and good evening to everybody. What an inspiring and wonderful presentation by the people that knew Tiro. Comrade Moemedi, I'm sorry, I cannot put my video on. I'm not in a video-friendly place.
No, that's so fine. We want your voice more than anything else, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and thank you so much, Tate Mojuta, Mr. Tate Welile, Osnosi. What a mind-boggling and inspiring presentation with regards to Tiro. We read so much about him and we think we know about him, but hearing from the horse's mouth, as you are the horses, it becomes even more clearer and more inspiring. When one looks at the speech that Tiro gave that made him to be banned, that Welile says that is not the speech. Yes, but that is not what made him to be banned. But looking at that speech, a very powerful speech, and when you take that speech and when you take what he addressed at that graduation ceremony and you put it into the context of today, one finds that so little has changed in terms of the system that really perpetuated those oppressions on Black students, and what the system, even under Black leadership, is doing with regards to especially from the education side, with what it is being done to Black students and Black people. You find that access to education is still a very big milestone for Black rural, not even only rural people, students to achieve or to get. It is still a very big problem for Black people to access education. The fees must fall. I agree, they took from the teachings and the movement that Tiro led to say that how can we still in this era have such obstacles, have such obstructions in front of us when we want to get education and so on. You also look at his speech, one sentence that really keeps coming to my mind of that speech where he says, the so-called leaders, he was talking about the apartheid leadership. But when I look at it, when I internalize it, it still talks to the leaders of today, that the so-called leaders who are saying that they are for education of all, but they are not giving access for all or to all. It becomes difficult to say, or it becomes difficult for Black students to access education as opposed to how others who are privileged in terms of finances and all that, and it is not Black students that are getting that. The other thing will be when we look at the history that our learners are taught in school, in our schooling system. Also, talked about history that should be written so that we all know what really happened and everything. When you look at the history books or the history curriculum in schools that are taught, or that is taught from primary school even to university, you find a very, very little that is taught about Tiro. You find snippets about Biko, you find snippets about Sobukwe, you find little or nothing on Tiro, but in his speech was very emphatic about what the education system should be like. So I am really saddened that we are having this conversation in 2021, but we still see the same things that Tiro fought for or fought against, still rearing their ugly heads, even more when years go on and on. You find exorbitant fees that are charged or that are put as registration, as study fees, and those are not afforded by our Black people cannot afford those. You find so many marginalization with regards to education for Black people. So we also need, as we educate our young people about the history, but we also need to educate them that we need a revolution to make sure that the education system and the leaders in our government must do more for the majority of our country. We are now heading for a very difficult and dangerous time where we now see more foreign nationals getting into parliament. And now we are afraid that education and history, it is going to be at a peril where we'll find that what we are thinking should be taught in our schools is actually going to be not taught at all. If there was little that was started to say that let there be some small thing about Biko, small things about Tiro or Sobukwe, they will dissipate, and we'll find now will be being the history will find ourselves, our schools and our universities will now be more on the Chinese history, the German history, will be reversing instead of going forward. It is a crucial and a dangerous space that we find ourselves in as South Africans, that we are allowing all these things to happen. As we revolutionize education, we need to start with the people. We need to start with the people that are leading the country, or we need to start with the system that is leading the country. It needs to be overhauled. We need an overhaul of a system that is governing in our country, that is not for our people, but for other people, and a little part in that is for Black people and the indigenous people of this country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Advocate Sipho Mantula, I saw your hand earlier. If you still want to pose a question, please go ahead.
Good evening, the leadership Azapo to still keep the fires burning to remember Ramothibe Abram Tiro. I think one of the contributions which I want to agree with the elders, the power of education in oral history. These sessions, I hope, as we are archiving them, we are able to work around on the part of oral history in the basic education. I've picked up what people are saying, but the school named after Tiro, Slari, they don't even do social science, what you are calling history or her story or our story. We need to do the tracking and tracing of Tiro's journey. We can't locate Tiro to TEF alone. When Nhlapo Welile ka Soweto, we can't leave Lebaro alone. We can't leave the continent, more so the history, Yaka Ramothibe. It was not located in one space. Including Lego Dinokana, we can't go further by saying that even the other form of education is that documentaries and films of Tiro, why are they so low? Why are we not beyond the lectures? Why are we not having practical solutions that can address our education system? But the last point is the justice for Tiro and TAT. I think that's what we are trying to avoid, not to get into it, to say, but who really killed Tiro and what was the reason behind? You might have TRC files, they might be hot, they might be censored, they might be classified. But we need to get into the justice project as well, because coincidentally, Tiro, we are talking about him today. I was talking about Eduardo Wakamontlana, that he was killed by the parcel bomb on this day in 1969. But here we are talking about 1974.
All right.
But Eduardo was on the 3rd of February. So you might ask yourself if we don't get into the justice project as well, because many of our leaders, they will go through the same route. It might not be the same parcel note or a study material, but there might be many forms of eliminating some of our thinkers. But I agree, Nhlapo, for the issue of resuscitating our history with the young people. We should never shy away. But the media as well, we should not shy away from engaging our public media, our community media, wherever we are. We cannot be confined to only social media. We should still remember that the power of radio in our languages, to can read Tiro speech in our different languages, it is very important. It's not tribal, it's not ethnic. And I think that's my contribution. Northwest Province, Gauteng Province, Limpopo, they need to come up with a joint program, as well as the national government, to come up with a program. Not only about the statue, we don't need even statues. We are not the culture of statues. Only, but we need a culture of bursaries for Bana. We need books of even people who lived with Tiro, because many Nhlapo, strike, we need their volume 1, volume 2, so that they can be in the schools. I think
Okay, I don't think there's time to take any more questions, but if there's someone who is very pressed to make a comment after Ndade Mandula, I'll just use my discretion and stretch it a bit. So is there anyone that wants to come in? Please just be brief with that, and then I'll hand over to our panelists to respond and to make their closing remarks. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. It is true for Ndade Tiro is a representation of many. And on that note, Welile, and many others that are not here today, that fought for the air that we breathe today. As the beneficiaries of your work, we really appreciate it. You might not hear it a lot, but some of us really, really appreciate it. And we would love to honor you lisantsane le phela. And to Mojuta, ke rata ho leboga his contribution to this beautiful evening today and bringing us forward to us as this generation and what it is we're seeing in society today and how part of what we need to do and the genesis of moving forward is resting somewhere in healing. It is key that we find healing. Society is torn up today. We are struggling with the work that was not finished. That's what we're struggling with today. So for us to find and chart a way forward as this generation, we must take it upon ourselves as well. Generation Yabontate Tiro, Yabontate Welile, like Libo Nosipho bari, they did what they could, and Banaba Batlore Kiringi Haki Fitako. So it is on our shoulders that we should put another brick on the foundation that they gave us.
Sure.
But just to them, Giratori, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I think you speak for all of us in expressing that gratitude and appreciation.
To emphasize one thing when Moemedi, you know, during the PCM, when we worked, we were not working because we wanted the awards,
yes,
or we wanted the accolades. We did what we did because we had to do it for the Black people. And this is why we were successful in 1972 up to about 1976. And people still need, students still need guidance as to what is the vision and what is it that they want to achieve from one of these things. And, you know, we are still there, Welile, irrespective of and all of that, but we are still there.
Thank you. Okay, are those your closing remarks, Menosi?
Hey.
Thank you, Raliboha. Let me go to Ndate Welile to make his closing remarks. Is he still here?
Yes, I'm still around and alive.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very
much. Thanks to everyone for the comments that they've made. We've taken note of them. And like Nosi is saying, I think we are available. You know, one thing, it's nice to be a pensioner if you know what you want in life. You can always think about the best things to do and to make sure that life continues and you can continue to contribute. Because I think the first thing that Kaukelo said, if I got it right, it's correct. It's correct. I think this is what should motivate us. We can't be satisfied that we can vote, we can have freedom of speech, association, and all these technical organizational matters about democracy and freedom of all of these things. There's much more to it. And I think that is a challenge that we have to stand up to. And it is our responsibility to do so. We have to do it. You know, just one thing. I think part of the problem that we are faced with in this continent, and particularly in this country, outside of the South African exceptionalism, which sometimes misguides our thinking, there is a serious problem with this continent, South Africa not being an exception, a leadership deficit. Everybody believing that things begin with them. There is no continuity. Challenges that we could be dealing with are left hanging or dropped somewhere along the way, because people are still trying to find a better life for themselves, not for the people, better life for themselves. It's a big challenge. You see, at the time when I was off a bit, I was talking to somebody who was telling me about the new challenge that is now arising.
Okay.
With the election of the new leadership in the African Union. Somebody saying that there should be no election because their candidate is not having a good shot. So some of these small things, they impact negatively on our development all around. Then you ask yourself, where is South Africa in this whole process?
Yes.
So there are serious challenges, and I think this is what we need to take up and begin to deal with very firmly. With the little energy that is left, we have to. There's no choice.
No, thank you. But from your presentation tonight, it looks like you still pack a lot of energy and the mind is still fresh. So we'll keep calling on you, Nhlapo, to share and to help in guiding our youth, us, and society at large. Comrade Mojuta, you were our main presenter for the evening, so it is appropriate that you are the last one to speak so that and just to say thank you to you once again. But go ahead and do your closing remarks, and if you need to respond to the questions, please.
To Azapo for giving us this opportunity and also trusting us with this mandate, and also for recognizing that we are here and we are ready to do the work, and we are willing to work with other people. Just a brief answering of engagement with some of the questions. I think with what Mr. Nyati has said about reaching the right audience, it's very important. And there are already Black people who are doing the work, people in places like Salt Lake University who are translating books and work into Setswana. They have projects where they repatriate some of the works in English, like Salt Lake's work in English. I forgot the writer's name, Mokaye and Lorato Trok. So there are people who are already doing the work of translating and taking work from English into our own languages. And also it's a challenge for us as scholars as well to say it's not just enough to write in English. We have to work with experts in African languages and actually translate our work so that they can be accessible to the majority of our people. To reiterate again, the workshops are necessary, but in our little corners we can do so much. But also in moving forward, we must take the bold steps of actually forming institutions and organizations where we can archive, where we can, I'm inspired by the African American community because they have archived so much. I mean, there was a program in the 1930s in America where they called it the Slave Project, where they went around just documenting slave people who were of slave descendants and actually getting the history. Because for some of us, the challenge is now as we do this history, even now, as I said, that there's so much to write about our luminaries and our people. But once the older generation goes, they go with the library. So we must just sometimes do projects where we interview Black consciousness luminaries like Matshoba and Nhlapo, because it's important that we capture their work, and also someone else in the next generation might come and say, look, I want to do a gender analysis of Black consciousness, and here's the work of people like Matshoba and what they've left us, So workshops and all these other interventions are necessary, but we must never fear to do a national coordination of our things. We must never fear to say Black History Society, Black Scholars Forum, you know, where we advance, where, you know, as scholars, we say to each other to say, look, students need bursaries. You are working, you've got pensions and whatever else. Leave money behind so that students can benefit as well. As long as we are still in the system, we need to find a way to make it work for us. I mean, in America, they've got, I forgot the name, but it's a fund, the Black what fund, where they come together as Black people and give bursaries to students to go to universities. Fees must fall. I was also involved there as a participant on the ground. And I must agree that yeah, some of the gains that were made have been reversed. But I'm grateful that it happened because it conscientized a lot of students and it actually opened up the discussion on decolonization. You know, but we must never forget where we come from, as the elders have said to us, to say it didn't start with your generation. Look to the past so that you can be inspired and not to give up, because for some of us it's easy to say, well, Black consciousness died with the bannings in 1977. But as we read deeper into our history, we realize that Black consciousness is alive and kicking, and it was there, it was flourishing in the 1980s, you know. So it's easy because the mass media, the information that is being peddled about Black consciousness is one where it's sought to institutionalize it, to take it out of its radical Black community beginnings, and also to just center it around Steve Biko, as if his ideas were not sharpened by his comrades. You know, so we must guard against that cultism where, you know, a few individuals represent Black consciousness. We must look for those stories. Mapetla Mohapi, we must go to places like Josana's Hook. You know, we must find Bomtulika Shezi and their families, what's happening. Because for me, it was important to speak to the family of Onkgopotse Tiro, the sister, the brother, the aunt, you know, and as tough as it is, you know, as there are contradictions, but it's important to know their families and to realize that in them, the spirit also lives in their families. Meka Mogelo spoke about things still being the same. It is a tragedy that, you know, as things change, some stay the same. And for us as historians, we're looking at change over time. We must be cognizant of the fact that we still have a long way to go as a Black community, and we look up to the invocation of Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, as he says to us, organize, 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 because we can never be comfortable in being the only ones. We can never be comfortable in having a seat at the table. We must disrupt the table. We must make sure that we take the table to the Black communities. We take the table to our people. And also the history curriculum, it's interesting that in 2023, history is going to be made a compulsory subject. And for some of us, we actually looking at how for me, it's important that I go into the Nukana, the community of Onkgopotse Tiro, and Mahikeng as well, and actually speak to the districts, the education districts and the circuits, and actually see how we can have a program incorporating people like Onkgopotse Tiro around issues like June 16, around the curriculum, and actually say to them, look, we can do a booklet, we can do a small, you know, something so that the young people in those communities are there. I've seen so much being done with the legacy of Onkgopotse Tiro, but, you know, the Nukana itself, those environments themselves on June 16, on these commemorative days, they are very silent. And it's a cause for concern that we've neglected the deep work of actually tracing our people to where they come from. It's not necessarily ethnocentrism or tribalism. You know, it's more to say, look, we need to acknowledge who we are and our ethnicity, you know, to say, where do we come from as a people? And once we appreciate, then we will be able to realize that it's important for us to know all the languages. It's important for us to respect each other's cultures. It's important to critique shows and stories on TV that seek to portray that, okay, when you watch shows like Uzalo, it's like it's a Zulu-centric show. Whereas if you go to Mlazi, you'll find Basotho, you'll find Zulu people living with different ethnic groups. So we must seek to fight against the demon of tribalism. We must exorcise that demon and actually say, you know, this is not the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that Black people are speaking to each other in the different languages. I come from the community of Alexandra, and in Alexandra, you know, I don't have a mother tongue. Ke Motswana, but I ke kgone bua Setswana se se tlhapileng ka gore ke godile mo gare batho ba bantsi. You know, and for me, that is very important that we also recognize that dialects are important. We don't look down on certain dialects. You know, people like the Mapulana people in Limpopo, we need to tell their history and actually say, look, these communities have a history that needs to be told. Let's move away from the dominant narrative as well in our Black communities and ethnicities to say in KZN, it's only Zulu people. In KZN, you find Ngunis of different dialects, of different ethnicities. Where are the Ndwandwe? Do we speak about the Ndwandwe, the Zizi, the Dlamini? There's so many different peoples. Eastern Cape, same thing. You know, not only Amathosa, there's different communities in the Eastern Cape. The Mpondo have their own history. So we need to really work on how we can bring back identity and dig deeper. You know, the colonialists, the ethnographers, the white scholars, they did a basic survey. Our job is even harder because now, whatever contradictions we find in communities, I mean, already in the Botswana communities, of what I'm finding is that the dominant communities who are stronger militarily are the ones who've been documented. We need to document other communities. Like there's a community in a place called Mabiskran, you know, the Batlaku, the Batlaku people. Their history has not been told, and it dawns upon us as historians to actually go into these rural communities and actually start doing the difficult work, you know, and also documenting the contradictions to say, how can you say Northwest is a Tswana province, but you find the Amahlubi in Rustenburg, Kayakulu, you know, Amatrina in Ziras as well. So we must look into those stories and actually disrupt the dominant narrative of Bantustans as actually being the narrative of Black communities since the 1960s. Then Ntate Mantula, I agree with him about solutions. You know, our work is not just theoretical musings. Our work is rooted in actually practical reality. Onkgopotse Tiro spoke about practical reality, and it's something that must drive us to actually say, you know, yes.
Okay, Mojuta, try and wrap it up. We were supposed to have ended at 8, so I don't want to be unkind to my participants. So we have about 11 minutes. We'll extend it by 30 minutes. So let's end it at 20:30, but I'm not stopping you. Just try and wrap it. We will find another occasion where you can speak broadly about history, but thank you very much for those insights. Yeah.
So we need to find justice, and wherever we are, let's work together. Let's push for that. And also, I'm also working on trying by the end of this year to translate the speech into Setswana so that it can also be accessible to different communities, and working with others to translate into other languages. The last point I want to make is about healing, you know, and I just want to go back to Mayor KP Ndlovu to say, you know, one of our struggle icons, Solomon Mahlangu, every year the family has to slaughter an animal because his spirit is still wandering around, you know. The spirit is not at ease because of the way the apartheid regime killed him. And this is part of the spiritual work of healing ourselves as Black communities, to say some of our people in looking for that justice is also to say finding closure for families so that the spirit can also be at peace. Comrades, thank you very much, and I hope we can keep the conversation and the discussions going, because it does not end here. Every year we need to revisit and actually continue the work on Black history, continue the work on Black historiography, and making our own contributions as to to the discussions and making sure that we leave a solid legacy for the next generation so that we can eradicate the legacies of Bantu education, because Bantu education sought to render our people as hewers of wood and drawers of water. And we are railing against that system and calling on the elders to say, you manage in spite of that system. We want to work with you and learn from you, even if you went through that Bantu education, because even people like Onkgopotse Tiro were in the Bantu education system, but they came out of it and work together and forge a new path. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that very passionate and inspirational and informative address. You've touched particularly towards the end of your, this last presentation, the various sub-themes that we can consider as we uncover, and as I like to say, represent Black history, because our history has to be represented, because most of what you read about is how other people saw us and the narrative that they wanted to share with us. There is a book here which I picked up in my little travels in the US then as a young student. I really made it a point that in my travels I collected rare books that we can't find here in South Africa. It's just that the face has been torn. I have little boys who have grown up now, but I used to make them read this. But it talks about Black history for beginners. Ultimately, we should get to a point where we produce books like this, because in this book, what the African Americans were trying to do was to present their own history, talk about, the Olympics, the Julian Bonds, who headed the Black delegation to the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968. Huey Newton is there, and many of the Malcolm X is also there. So this is the kind of history, documents, booklets that we can produce, because it's not enough to say we want to mainstream it in education. If the doors are not going to open, we can actually initiate and embark on projects like that. It's a book that is fairly accessible, presentable. You can see it's almost like a pictorial book, but with narratives there and there. So I just really want to encourage us that part of this Black History Month is to collect our history and ultimately, hopefully, get those who are interested to write some material out of it. Mojuta, thank you very much. I hope that you will be able to convert your honors mini dissertation into a book at some stage, because it needs to be generally available and not just be restricted to the marshy rooms and cupboards of academia. But continue doing the work, comrades. We really admire you and are quite impressed that somebody as young as you had the presence of mind not to be directed by your supervisors and researchers, because we know that that's what happens a lot in academia, and they get you to really do research on subjects that don't bear relevance and have resonance with your own background and your own reality. And we commend you for having chosen to particularly focus your work on Tiro. Comrades, let me thank you all for attending this evening, but also remind you that we are going to be rolling out this program for the month of February. We hope to host seminars, webinars like this on Wednesdays, and if we can, also maybe one of the days during the weekends, if some of our presenters can't make it on a Wednesday. But just to share with you what we have in the menu. Today was the launch. On the 6th, we're hoping to deal with the history of Black scientists and inventors. We are reaching out to our Black scientists here at home, on the continent, and in the diaspora to feature in that program, just so that they can talk to us about that side of our history. On the 10th, we have a purview into Black medicine and therapeutic and the therapeutic heritage. So there are comrades who are professors in academia that we are talking to, and we are asking them to participate. And on Saturday, the 13th, if we can, we will also take a look on the subject of economic history and the role of Black people. We also want to have a session on mathematics and technology, because those people are there, and Black people have been making contributions at IBM. They've been involved in coding and a whole lot of stuff, but you know, we're not exposed, or that history is not exposed to our kids at school and at universities. And then we will look at Black literature and cinema. We hope to invite some practitioners there. And then we will also take a look at the history of Black ideology and practice. You know, where do Black people begin in developing ideas or ideology? Because often when we go to university, we read about Karl Marx and we read about the liberal thinkers, but we haven't packaged, you know, documents on Black ideology and practice. And we're hoping that these sessions will help us to develop a compendium. And on Saturday, the 28th February, it will just really be a celebration. We're hoping to invite through some of our musicians to come and talk about Black musicology and art. And hopefully they will also perform for the audience. So keep joining in when you see our invite and enrich these discussions. Let me thank you. Let me say Kamago and Ngomso. Let's keep on, supporting these projects and activities.